Hello everyone, and welcome back to World of Warships Blitz with Terry, where today we do something slightly different. Today we are looking at a line split, and I am planning to go through all the line splits, because honestly the tech trees are relatively large at this point. This is just the German tech tree. And we're not even talking about the roughly same amount of ships that we're finding again in premiums. So we're talking about line splits. What is a line split? World of Warships Blitz has 4 classifications of ships: destroyers, cruisers, battleships, and carriers. But in fact, there are way more ship classes in between. And that's where you often find line splits. So for example, here we have 2 battleship lines. After you've made your way through the Dresden at tier 2, you then have the choice, well, not yet, but you then can hop over to the battleship line with the tier 3 Nassau. But from there you can either progress to the Kaiser at tier 4, or you can follow the other branch and get the von der Tann at tier 3, which is also classified as a battleship. And then these 2 lines are going in parallel all the way up to tier 10, where you end up with either the Großer Kurfürst or with the Schlieffen. So what is the difference between these 2 lines, because they're both classified as battleships, and which one should you choose? And like I said, I am planning to do that for the other ones as well over time. So let's see how useful you all find this. Let's begin with the Großer Kurfürst. And the way this format's going to work is that I am just going to look at the tier 10s, but we'll also have a very brief walk through the tech tree afterwards. Let's begin with the Großer Kurfürst, which is a battleship. The Großer Kurfürst is relatively heavily armored. In fact, the Großer Kurfürst is one of the tankiest battleship in the game, and has a fair amount of firepower. As traditional with German battleships, she is reasonably focused on the secondaries. How about the Schlieffen then? The Schlieffen is a battlecruiser. As such, the armor on the Schlieffen is nowhere near as good as on the Großer Kurfürst. Instead, however, she has significantly more firepower on the secondaries and on the torpedoes, which the Großer Kurfürst does not have. So let's begin by just comparing the 2 ships, because that gives us a bit of an indication of how these 2 lines are differing. The Großer Kurfürst gets a sonar, just like the Schlieffen. The Großer Kurfürst gets a precise aim skill for long range and gets 2 charges of the secondary overload skill. However, on the Großer Kurfürst, the secondary overload is a secondary overload 1, which increases range and firing speed by 20% for 15 seconds. On the Schlieffen, we don't get the precise aim for long-range engagements. However, we are getting a significantly more powerful secondary overload skill with an additional charge, because that gives us an increase of 30% for 25 seconds. Looking at the hull, you can see what I mean with battleship versus battlecruiser. The Großer Kurfürst has about 9,000 extra hit points and has a very significant citadel protection and a quite significant damage reduction. Damage reduction is applied, and we're going to need to talk about that a bit in a later point, but damage reduction is applied to the actual shell damage, not to other damage like fires and floods. That said, the Großer Kurfürst is nowhere near as maneuverable as the Schlieffen. I mean, no one's going to be accusing the Schlieffen of being a highly maneuverable ship. She is not, but compared to the Großer Kurfürst, she is positively nimble. If we're looking at the guns, the Schlieffen comes around with 420mm guns, compared to the Großer Kurfürst's 457mm guns. And the Schlieffen doesn't have the range, the damage, or the reload that the Großer Kurfürst has with the same number of main guns. So in that department, she is sufficiently less equipped. However, now it gets interesting. The Großer Kurfürst gets 4 twin guns of 150mm manual secondaries. The Schlieffen gets 8. And she has a faster base reload and a better range on these. And she can fire high explosive, although you generally don't want to bother with it. But she can fire high explosive with these. The automatic secondaries, the Großer Kurfürst comes in with 128mm. It's a relatively large caliber for auto secondaries, so this is a destroyer caliber gun. But while they do more damage, she doesn't quite have the same range, and the 105s from the Schlieffen, so the dual-purpose AA guns, are also reloading more quickly. And of course, the Schlieffen has torpedoes. Well, I say torpedoes. They're technically more like sea mines, that like you give them a little nudge and then they slowly drift towards the enemy ship. Because these things can be overtaken by French destroyers. So they have a reasonably long reload, but they do a good amount of damage, and a 10.5 kilometer range is not something to sneeze at. However, four quadruple launchers is a large amount of torpedoes that you can spit out. And even if you're not managing to get any hits with your torpedoes, you can still do a significant amount of damage. In the AA department, both ships are pretty comparable, as in they might shoot the occasional plane down, but they are very much not going to be able to defend themselves from incoming aircraft. That's not what these ships are for. And lastly, on the concealment side, the Schlieffen has an excellent 10.8 kilometer base concealment for a battleship, which means that with a concealment build, we can push that below 10 kilometer, which is going to be almost the range of the secondaries once you have the secondary overload running, which means the Schlieffen is a ship that does the sort of surprise pop-up thing from time to time, at a point where it is actually reasonably difficult for an enemy to decide that he is in trouble and needs to disengage. And by that time, he is well and truly within secondary battery range. And that's where the Schlieffen shines. So what is the difference between the two ships? Well, in terms of build, you can see that they are relatively similar. You would build the Großer Kurfürst generally with secondary gun specialization for additional reload instead of further buffing the armor. You could do that if you wanted to, but personally I think buffing the secondaries is a better idea here. And in slot 1 you would obviously be sailing with the unique, for the German battleship line, unique secondary battery mod 2, which gives you both range and dispersion on the auto secondaries. In slot 3 on the Großer Kurfürst, I am sailing with the steering gear mod. Apologies, the server is a bit laggy today. As you see the occasional hourglass spinning. I am still sailing with the steering gear mod simply because the concealment on the Großer Kurfürst is so dreadful that it's not going to make a huge difference. But with that, we end up with, and with the historical camo on, we end up with 66,000 hit points and a 15 kilometer range on the mains, which is pretty good, but with an almost 8 kilometer base range on the 150s. And then the 128s have a 7 kilometer range at which they start unloading with a 4-second base reload, which is pretty good. That said, you have a smaller number, because if you're looking at the Schlieffen, you have a significantly larger number of guns. And on the Schlieffen, I am also using the secondary specialization, because honestly, really going for the elite torpedo operator makes no sense whatsoever on the ship. So definitely use the secondary gun specialization. With that and the historical camo and the build that is identical except for the concealment, because of the very good base concealment and the lack of armor, we're still coming in with a relatively small 57,000 hit points. And with an only 14 kilometer base range on the guns, but how in the end the secondaries is where it's at. The 150s, of which she has twice as many as the Kurfürst, have a 9 kilometer base range and a base reload of 6 seconds. This is before you enable the secondary overload. And the 105mm dual purpose clock in at over 7 kilometers with a 3.6 second base reload. And we've got the concealment down to 9.7 kilometers. So these ships are different in that the Großer Kurfürst is a tank and a battering ram. She's pretty good at shrugging direct damage off from enemy shells that are incoming. In fact, I don't think there's any ship that is much better than this in the game. What she isn't very good at is damage over time, however. And this is where the meta comes in a little bit at this point. The Schlieffen is nowhere near as good as taking damage. In fact, she is more akin to something like a French battleship in that regard. But she can dish out enormous amount of damage at mid ranges, which for the Schlieffen is about 8 to 9 kilometers. So the Großer Kurfürst is a ship in which you say you make a break for your team through an enemy line. The Schlieffen is a ship that is more interested in getting in, doing damage, getting out again. If you're thinking of them in terms of weapons, the Großer Kurfürst is a warhammer or a battering ram, whereas the Schlieffen is something like a rapier. Both do large amounts of damage, but you need to have a very different approach to how to play them. I've got the Commander Franz von Hippe set up for now, so we're going out with a fully maxed out setup here. On the Großer Kurfürst, he really fits perfectly because he comes in with the armament repair expert, which makes a lot of sense because you have a lot of secondary guns that can be shot off. He comes in with the Sixth Sense, which is nice to know how many enemy ships are targeting you. Sonar operator, obviously, and very importantly, the close quarters combat expert plus for an extra 20% dispersion buff, making these secondaries pretty precise, and the APCS plus for increased penetration for the main guns. So in that regard, he makes perfect sense for the Großer Kurfürst. But if we wanted him to sail on the Schlieffen, we would probably set him up slightly differently. So let's transfer him over for now and reset his skills. And then we will see how we would set up. So on the Schlieffen, underwater protection expert still makes sense, and I would go with the armament repair expert here as well. Same with artillery maintenance and with the Sixth Sense. Now the Schlieffen doesn't get the precise aim, and on both ships the Großer Kurfürst gets 3 charges. So fire supremacy isn't really necessarily a concern. I would definitely go with survivalist on both ships. And as the next one is really tempting. So this depends a little bit. I always find it a bit of a shame if you miss out on a legendary skill. So not taking the Recon and Surveillance Plus skill here is a little bit of a shame. But the exploit weakness is a very strong contender because of the auto secondaries and just because of the sheer amount of shells that you output with both ships that would do additional damage. But Recon and Surveillance, I'm going to go with that. Now we don't need the marksman skill on the Schlieffen because, well, the Schlieffen doesn't get the precise aim, so we can get fully prepared here. It is extremely tempting on the Schlieffen to take Adrenaline Rush because we have all the weapon systems that are affected, which means that if we're down to less than 25%, we get additional reload on everything. However, given the massive impact of Extinguisher and again the current meta of things, I would probably recommend taking Extinguisher here. The Close Quarters Combat Expert is an obvious choice, and in Tier 10 you can either go for compartment maintenance if you are concerned about flooding. This is usually more of an aircraft carrier problem that you're sort of dealing with permafloods, or the Honor Seeker for the additional damage. I tend to go with the additional damage output and deal with floods just with repair kits. But if you find yourself flooding a fair bit, then that might be a good choice. Obviously, the APCS Plus. And then you have kind of a choice. You can get your deck armor improved, given that the Schlieffen doesn't have the greatest deck armor. It's probably not hugely impactful. You can go for the additional Citadel strike, but then again, the Schlieffen does not have the 457 millimeters on the Großer Kurfürst. Or you could take the Giant Hunter to do additional damage with the Schlieffen's torpedoes. Sea mines. So all of these three are decent choices, I'd say, because being burnt down, and this brings us to the let's pick this one for now, just for demonstration purposes. This is the point I was trying to make about the meta, because while the Großer Kurfürst was the sort of ship that you could sail into multiple enemy ships with and be relatively safe from being being blown apart by shells. The proliferation of very, very high caliber ships combined with the proliferation of damage over time ranged ships have made the life a little bit harder for the Großer Kurfürst these days. Because if you are up against destroyers and they, refuse to come in close range, but just decide that they want to burn you down from long range, or you are faced with torpedo spamming monstrosities like the Jinan or the Sejong, and these are scenarios where your armor doesn't help you, because the armor only helps against shell damage. It doesn't help against damage over time from fires. Fires do as much damage no matter how much armor you have on the ship. So the sort of, I'm going to walk through enemy lines, guns blazing, and shrug off the incoming shells for the most part experience on the Großer Kurfürst is not quite what it used to be. Großer Kurfürst is still an excellent ship, don't get me wrong, but the Schlieffen has become a very, very strong contender. That is, if you know how to play her. And that brings us to the games. So, I've got 2 games for you today, one in the Großer Kurfürst, as you've just seen, and one in the Schlieffen. And then we will have a very brief talk about the 2 branches and kind of which one you want to pick and which one you want to take up. We'll start out with the Großer Kurfürst. We are facing Taiho, another Großer Kurfürst, Vermont, Friedrich der Große, Jinan, Smolensk and a Seattle. No destroyers on the enemy team, and we are playing a domination match on Friar's Lantern, which has some implications, because that means we can potentially be relatively aggressive. Now, it isn't that you're completely helpless against destroyers. In the opposite, because you have a sonar, which means if you keep an eye on them, they can't easily surprise you, and you've got a vicious set of 150mm secondaries that you can work with. So oftentimes destroyers going after Großer Kurfürst will not want to get too close. Now I have a Yamato with me and a Smolensk of our own. So we will be heading towards A Cup. Now the thing you don't want to do is to blindly rush into the enemy team thinking that you are invulnerable, because you very much are not invulnerable. You are in a very strong, a very well-armored battleship, but invulnerable you are not. So we will let the carrier scoop out who we're actually facing there. There's one of the cruisers, there's another battleship over there, and that is our opposition. 2 battleships and a cruiser by the looks of it. We do have the Smolensk with us, who can potentially get into the... and there is the enemy Smolensk. So Smolensk is a priority target. Smolensk needs to go. So first things first, precise aim up, shots out at the Smolensk, because he hadn't actually seen us yet, because the enemy carrier hasn't been scouting over here. And there's the first citadel on the enemy Smolensk, and given the caliber of the guns, we are doing a respectable amount of damage. Now, there's Vermont as well, and the enemy Großer Kurfürst, but the Smolensk is the ship that takes priority here and that needs to die. Now the Smolensk is smoking up, so that means we are still going to get closer. The carrier is in on the fun, and Smolensk is only scary if you let it be. Now obviously I am on fire. I am not going to damage control a single fire, but now it's a double fire, so that I'll damage con. Then I am just following the tracers with manual aim and see if I can scope out the Smolensk. There come the Smolensk torpedoes. That is not a big problem because we have avoided them mostly. So there he is, he's firing. So all we need to do is use the secondaries to pin him down, and he is actually coming out of his smoke. So main guns out. This is the good time to use the first secondary overload just to make sure that he doesn't get away, and he does not get away. Now we have a double permafire, unfortunately, and this is just something you're going to have to get used to. But we have taken out a very, very dangerous enemy ship, and that means we are just going to let that burn, because we don't really have a choice either. But the Vermont has buggered off and abandoned this flank, and the enemy Großer Kurfürst is standing somewhat alone over there. He is air spotted, which means I can shoot him, but he can't see me, so he can't shoot back, which is always good. Now, you're not going to do citadels against an enemy Großer Kurfürst, but that doesn't mean that you're not going to be doing an awful lot of damage against these things. So now, while the friendly Smolensk is starting to hang south, Now I'm scoping out my opposition here. I've got Taiho, I've got Großer Kurfürst, and the Shimakaze has died. And that tells you how dangerous the Großer Kurfürst is for destroyers. Shots out at the carrier. Let's see if we can take it. Nope. But with the friendly carrier help, and with the Yamato on my right, who's gone the long way around, I am confident that we can take these guys. So next heal up. Großer Kurfürst is defensive in reverse and is coming under fire from pretty much everybody. Friendly Taiho has taken out the Friedrich der Große, and that Großer Kurfürst has no chance against 2 battleships with carrier support. That doesn't mean he's not going to be doing any damage, but he is dead. So this is a situation that I can very much get through. We're gonna aim for deck. The German battleships have a special armor mechanic that makes it harder to citadel them. But with the secondary overload up, it's as good as we use as any. We're spitting fire at that thing, and he is dead, which means we can now go after the carrier. I don't think I'm not sure, but I don't think the extra citadel protection is something you get on the battle cruisers. So you have to be really more careful there. But hello, Mr. Taiho. This is sort of the dessert after you've bitten your way through. And that's 1 citadel, 3 citadels. There's the citadel crisis medal. And then we'll just finish him off with the secondaries. Unless the Yamato gets him first. And the Yamato gets him first, but that's alright. And there we are. That's this flank rolled up, and the rest of the team has pretty much obliterated the rest of the enemy team. We're just going to go into the torpedoes of the dead carrier, who is not going to be doing anything anymore, and farm a little bit more damage on the Vermont. But that's basically the gameplay that you have on a Großer Kurfürst. You want to be at the tip of the spear in the battle line. That doesn't mean that you need to cap rush in this thing, because you have the maneuverability of a brick, and while you are dangerous against enemy destroyers, you're by no means impervious to torpedoes. So do try to avoid taking all 15 torpedoes from a Shimakaze, and make sure that you are staying with your team within range of your secondaries, and support a push, but when it makes sense. So once you have an advantage and you say, I can take that, and even if you're not surviving, but you can break through and open up a flank for your team and take down 2 enemy ships in the process, that's worth it usually. So Großer Kurfürst is still a very strong ship. And so is the Schlieffen. But the Schlieffen is a different kind of beast. We are facing Shikishima, Colombo, Mecklenburg, Montana, Black Rhone, Khabarovsk, and a bot, Gdansk, in center control and cage. So not much of a torpedo threat, which is always nice, and not many destroyers, which in the Schlieffen is less of a problem than on the Großer Kurfürst, because you have torpedoes of your own, which means destroyers will not rush you as easily. You are a bit more maneuverable, and you've got a lot more firepower on the secondaries on the Schlieffen. No carrier either, which is much appreciated, which gives us more freedom. If there's a carrier in play, you can't play as freely as you would otherwise do, because you have to stick with your team unless you're certain that the carrier is facing elsewhere. Now, the secondaries on the Schlieffen come preloaded with high explosive. I generally switch that over to armor piercing, because German 150mm armor piercing is very, very good. And what we'll do is we'll not rush into the center of the capture circle, because we are not a tank. We are a murderous weapons platform, but the armor is a bit more questionable on the Schlieffen. So we do have to manage our health, which means the idea that we have here is we'll use the corner of this island, and we'll wait for the friendly destroyer to scout out enemy ships. And there is the bot Gdansk. So he's almost in secondary range at 9 kilometers, and there's the Black Rhone. 1 ship's targeting me. That is going to be the Gdansk. So the Rhone isn't doing anything yet. And I'm mostly going to be ignoring the Gdansk and just open up at the Rhone. Why? Because the Rhone is a much bigger threat for my daring. But this is about as far forward as I want to go. I don't want to go any closer. I want to engage the Rhone and draw him away from the daring and make sure that he's not he's not becoming a problem. I've got the secondary overload running. Rhone is going to be trying to get his torpedoes away, and I'm starting to take a couple of hits here from the center of the map, and the hit points here are very quick in depleting. So that's we'll leave the bot to the auto secondaries, and the bot is dead. And now we just have to finish off the Rhone, and that should be the end of the Rhone. There we go, and then we'll keep reversing. Sonar up. There are the Rhone's torpedoes. Yes, he wanted to get his torpedoes away. No, he's not going to land these on target. But we're basically down to half our hit points. But we have cleared this flank. There's the Shikishima back there. Now I could get into a long-range gun duel with the Shikishima, but why would I? Because I can literally stop shooting my guns, wait for all my consumables to come off cooldown. We've done 40,000 points of damage. That's a pretty good start. The friendly Slava calls out the Shikishima as a target, and the Slava very much does not want to get into a close-range engagement with the Shima. So I am going to do that for him. But I don't have a reason to open up just yet. I'm gonna get my speed up. Shikishima isn't even looking this way. And Daring is getting awfully close there to the enemy Mecklenburg. I'm not sure he's going to enjoy that. But I've now got my heal, I've got some hit points back, I've got the secondary overload ready. Shikishima has just fired, so let's work on the rapid disassembly of that thing. Secondary overload up, there go the auto secondaries. Daka! And now we are rushing the Shikishima. Shikishima has noticed that and is going to start turning around, but I've got the hit points to spare to take one salvo from the Shikishima without too much trouble, and I am just unloading at that thing in the meantime. And he's fluffed it, he's sent his shells into my belt armor, which is about the only place on my ship that can potentially have a shot at deflecting it. He's going to run into the island, so I'm dropping the torpedoes in his position where he's going to have to turn. And from that turn, his forward turrets are now out of alignment, plus he's being chased by a destroyer, though that Shikishima is extremely dead. And has not realized that the rest of his team has abandoned this flank, which means we have won this flank. Shikishima is going to die. It's either me or the Daring taking him down, and depending whose torpedoes he's going to run in first, my sea mines or the Daring's torpedoes, if he gets any away. Never mind, the Slava has taken him down. Well, we haven't even lost any significant amount of hit points in that regard. So now it's time to head back into the capture circle. So a quick well played to the team, and we're ready to head into the capture circle. I've still got one more heal, and there is a Christopher Colombo. Vermont has just taken down the Montana, but is in a defensive battle over there against a full health Mecklenburg and a rushing Christopher Colombo. So team calls out, let's make sure we get the area, but I don't think we're in huge trouble here. But now is a good time to rush in, because the last two ships don't have, they don't have an awful lot to do anymore. And we'll see if we can still save our Vermont by going after the Christopher Colombo. I'm going to keep the main guns trained on the Mecklenburg, and I'm going to use the torpedoes on the starboard side against the Colombo. Let's get some shots out at the Mecklenburg, who is almost in secondary range if I'm going to use the secondary overload. But I can turn, I can get the torpedoes away against the Mecklenburg, and then we'll get the other side torpedoes away against the Colombo, just in case the Vermont isn't going to be able to take him down himself, because Vermont is running out of hit points rapidly. Then we get the secondary overload up, help out a little bit against the Colombo. Maybe we can save the Vermont, and otherwise my torpedoes will take it. Vermont's taken down the Colombo with the secondaries, well done, and Vermont has survived, and that just leaves the Mecklenburg. I can't remember if Mecklenburg has torpedoes, so we'll put the sonar up just in case. But that is, that Mecklenburg is now in big trouble, because he is being absolutely hammered by a Schlieffen, and yeah, that hurts, and you can't do that very often. But the thing is, you have such a stupendous amount of firepower on these ships that if you time the things right, you can do a staggering amount of damage with a ship like the Schlieffen. You can't play the same way of breaking through, just tanking, breaking through. You probably don't even want to be in the battle line, because you are not a ship of the line, you are a battle cruiser. And you have one of the most fearsome amounts of firepower in tier 10 available, with the set of torpedoes that you have, the secondaries and the main guns. The Schlieffen is relatively easy, or comparatively easy to shut down, because of the low hit point pool and of the relatively weak armor. But if you can play to her strength and make sure that you're not overextending yourself, you're managing your hit points, you can do, and you've seen, I've done this almost without getting torpedo hits on target. If I had gotten a couple of torpedoes on target, that might have still be a different story. But yeah, the Schlieffen is an absolute monster in terms of damage output, but you have to manage her health. The Großer Kurfürst can do a lot of damage, especially at point-blank range, and relies more on her armor than on stealth and map awareness to survive. The bigger problem that you sort of have at the moment with the Großer Kurfürst is that if you don't have an opening, and that is a problem with the Schlieffen to a degree as well, but the Schlieffen is stealthier. If you don't have an opening, the ships are reasonably easy to just burn down from a distance, and there's relatively little you can do about it if the enemy just refuses to operate within secondary range. So, which of the two are you going to play? Which line is better? I don't think there is necessarily a better between the two. I would say they're different. The Großer Kurfürst and the line that leads up to it is reasonably stable in terms of ships. So you're starting out at tier 3 with the Nassau, then Kaiser, König, Bayern are pretty similar. The Gneisenau is a bit of an oddball, because she feels actually like she would fit much better in the other line, because the Gneisenau is sort of more like a battle cruiser almost. But then the Bismarck is a very good tier 8, and the Friedrich der Große does pretty well at tier 9 as well, and is a good lead up to the eventual Großer Kurfürst. These ships play better at the traditional battleship role. They're very tanky, and even if you end up not using the secondaries all that much, you can still do a very reasonable amount of damage with the main guns at long range. You get the precise aiming, you get very, very good armor, and as such, they're a bit more. I would say they're a bit easier to play, or at least a bit easier to play consistently, even if you're not too familiar with the intricacies of map awareness, when to push and where to go. The battle cruiser line, on the other hand, with von der Tann, Moltke, Derflinger, is kind of personally, I find the line starts shining at tier 6 with the Mackensen. Everything before that, the battleships are sort of a bit better at what they're doing. But starting out with the Mackensen, Prinz Heinrich, you have very good ships. Then you have a big letdown with the Zieten, because the Zieten is a very obscure battle cruiser due to her main gun arrangement and number of main guns. So the Zieten is a bit of the black sheep of the line, similar to the Gneisenau at the other one. But then with Prinz Ruprecht and Schlieffen, you have a very, very good tier 9 and an excellent tier 10 as well. The battle cruiser line is a bit more demanding, because in order to make the best of it, you need to know where to go, you need to know when to disengage, how to manage your hit points, and you need to have a pretty good map awareness to make this work. If you sit back at the edge of your range and just try to be a battleship, that isn't going to work out, because the Schlieffen is relatively easy, or comparatively easy, to shut down. She is not very well armored, and the majority of her damage comes from the secondaries at ranges of about 8 and 9 kilometers. So the Schlieffen is the, I would say, higher skill floor, but also potentially higher reward ship. She's not going to work every time, but if you know how to play the battle cruisers, you'll be rewarded quite handsomely with the sheer amount of joy and devastation that you can cause with these ships. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea if you're coming in and you want to play a German battleship, but you don't quite understand which one you want to go with and which line you're after. And that's it for me today. We will be back soonishly with another line split. Don't know yet which one, but until then, have a good one. Bye bye.